Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Carolyn Peterborough. I work as an Agricultural and Rural Economic Development Advisor for the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs. So on behalf of the organizers of this series of webinars, the Regional Municipality of York, Omafra, and Durham Region, it is my pleasure to welcome all of you to this vertical farming webinar series. So today's module is the second of 4 and is part of our vertical Farming 101 series. And today's topic is Applied Principles of Vertical Farming, featuring expert speakers based in York Region. So I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We would like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands which we all call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and to improve our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures, such as the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation and the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. Please join me in a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we are and can each in our own way to try to move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. COVID-19 has created challenges in food security. My regional counterparts in York Region and Durham Region were hearing that directly from many stakeholders that they wanted to learn more about the evolving field of vertical farming and how they could, and they were having requests, so how could you start your own business? So that led to the partnership between York Region, Durham Region, to plan and deliver on this topic, followed up by, there was actually a similar workshop that some of my colleagues within Northern Ontario organized last year. So at this time, I'm very happy to pass it over to Mina Hassan Ali, the Agri-Food Business Specialist from York Region, to bring you further greetings and introduce our speakers for today.
Thank you so much, Carolyn, and good morning, everyone. We are excited to host this webinar with our partners. As Carolyn mentioned, the purpose of the series is really to provide those aspiring or new vertical farmers with some best practices and how-to strategies in sort of setting up a farm. We've had more than 400 registrations from across Ontario, Canada, and even some global audience, which I think speaks to just how important and interesting this topic is. So please note that we are recording this webinar, and a copy of it will be made available to you for reference and posted on our York Link YouTube as well as the Region of York YouTube channels in March after the completion of the entire series. If I can please ask my colleague Larry to bring up our preliminary questions for you. It's an audience poll. Thank you, Larry. We have 2 questions for you. So if you can please answer them, and if you can scroll down to get to the next one. So while you're answering the poll, I just wanted to sort of share that today's focus is all about real world applications of the vertical farming principles. And we are going to go through a case study that we presented by Boreal Greens. We will also touch upon the roll-off and the importance of partnerships with a model that's going to be presented to you between Seneca College, Cambridge Center, and Boreal Greens. So this is a great model and a case study of partnership happening right here in York Region. Participants will also learn about some of the research trends that are happening in vertical farming, as well as the research dollars or the funding sources. So in terms of the process for today's session, we are going to go through each presentation, followed by a Q&A session at the end. At any point during the webinar, you can submit your questions through the chat function, and we will compile them and then moderate them at the end. If you can please stay muted during the entire presentations until the Q&A period, that would be great. And if you're just joining us, do introduce yourself in the chat. This is a great opportunity to connect with other stakeholders who are very interested in vertical farming virtually. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today, Chris Dudley. Chris is the Director for Entrepreneurship at Seneca College. Chris has over 35 years of experience of combined corporate business, entrepreneurship, and academic administration experience. In 2014, Chris took on the role of the founding director of Helix, which is Seneca's on-campus entrepreneurship incubator. Welcome, Chris, and over to you. Chris, you are unmuted.
There we go. Is that better? Yes, fantastic. So thank you, Mina, and it is an honor to be here facilitating this session, which is part of that larger free 4-part Vertical Farming 101 series. And as Mina mentioned, my name is Chris Dudley, and part of my responsibilities is overseeing Helix, Seneca's on-campus innovation and entrepreneurship incubator. And it is here that I get to work with and support new venture development from ideation straight through to launch and scaling. And this includes vertical farm companies. To be honest, I have the best job ever. Over the next 90 minutes, the panel will explore the applied principles of vertical farming. And I'm privileged to be joined by 3 passionate and active members in the vertical farming ecosystem. First up, Karen DeBow. Well, Karen is the executive director of Kingbridge Center Innovation Hub, a new and exciting innovation in the GTA innovation ecosystem. Karen is a serial entrepreneur whose work has been recognized with numerous awards. She has mentored hundreds of startups in different sectors, and now at Kingbridge, she is focused on scaling up companies with high impact solutions for realizing a sustainable future in areas of food, agriculture, energy, water, and water waste. Karen is dedicated, innovative, and a creative thinker with exceptional implementation capabilities and a real force in the ecosystem. Welcome, Karen. We'll also be joined by Brandon in a second or two. We'll be joined by Brandon in a little bit. Oh, Brandon's here now, who is the entrepreneur, vertical farmer, founder, and CEO of Boreal Greens, and I'm proud to say a Helixer. And Brandon is an internationally recognized leader and trailblazer in vertical farming and controlled environmental agriculture. He has extensive experience in planning, startup, maintaining, and optimizing indoor agricultural operations. Brandon has built upon his Bachelor of Environmental Sciences and Sustainable Business Management certificate from Seneca College to help impact people and businesses around the world. He continues to support the growth of vertical farming and local food systems through his company, Boreal Greens. And rounding out the panel is Dr. Namrata Bare. Now, Dr. Bare is the Director of Applied Research at Seneca Innovation. In this role, Namrata applies her extensive, and I mean extensive, business background in development, commercialization, and research experience to help build strong industrial academic partnerships. She is passionate about developing strategic partnerships that create impact and add value for all stakeholders. Namrata's expertise comes from more than 15 years of experience at the Hospitals for Sick Kids, MyTax, and BFD Pharmaceuticals. She has a PhD in pharmaceutical studies from the University of Cincinnati and a Bachelor of Pharmacy from Mumbai, India. Man, I'm excited to hear from this distinguished panel. Now, as mentioned earlier, each member has a PowerPoint presentation that they will present. And through this session, you may have questions that you'd like to ask the panel. We welcome them and encourage you to please type them into the chat, and I will ask as many as we can towards the end of this session. And with that, let's get started. So Karen, you're first up. What role do partnerships play in vertical farming sector, and how is Kingbridge leading in this way?
Thanks, Chris. So happy to be here and delighted to be able to talk about the partnerships that Kingbridge has established. I'm just going to take a minute and share my screen, so if you just bear with me. We've been working in an area of partnerships for many years, but we're seeing that even more. The partnerships are a key enabling factor for really driving the local community-based solutions for addressing food security, but then also making sure those solutions are sustainable by connecting them into global networks. So today, I just want to take a quick second and introduce Kingbridge for those of you that may not know it. It's a 113-acre property in King Township in York Region, and the facility itself is 200,000 square feet conferencing center. And we are focused through the Innovation Hub on the transformation that's happening in agriculture, food, energy, water, environment, and community resilience, and looking at the connections between them. So we're really focused on a systems level approach to solving some of our challenges. So what do we actually do? Well, we invest and support ventures that have high potential, high impact solutions. We host demonstration projects at the property, either on the land or within the facility. And again, the types of ventures that we look to partner with are ones that are taking a 25 to 35-year time horizon. And then we catalyze we call them partnerships of purpose. But because everything is moving so quickly these days, whether it's technology, shifts in the market, new investments, we wrap around the ventures we partner with to really help them be sustainable. And we engage the community to co-create those solutions. And of course, applied research. So I'm going to take a step back and just talk about vertical farming for a minute. And I think Mina referenced the conference that was done in the fall. And one of the stats that the keynote Nicholas Badminton shared with us was that there's massive growth forecasted within the next 6 years in the vertical farming area, growing to over $18 billion. And last year alone, there was almost $1 billion investments in vertical farming. Why is that happening, and what is driving the growth? So there's a ton of different factors, but two I wanted to focus on. One is that our traditional farming techniques have really impacted the soil makeup that it grows 95% of our world's food. And in fact, half of the productive soil has disappeared in the last 50 years, not only because of urban sprawl, but also because of the use of those traditional agricultural techniques like tilling, and also use of pesticides and monoculture. And the UN actually predicts that if we continue down this road, we will run out of that productive topsoil in 60 years. So obviously there's a burning platform that vertical farming will solve. The second big driver is the urban intensification that's happening all around us, and the identification of food deserts. Now, that was something that was identified even before the COVID-19 pandemic, and a lot of great work's been done to identify that food deserts where people don't have easy access to healthy fresh foods typically occurs in the lower income neighborhoods. And so this has been a phenomenon that has been studied. And then along came COVID, which completely disrupted the supply chains, created a shortage of labor, not just in terms of harvests, but even at the manufacturing and processing level. our input costs have been driven up, and all at the same time when there's an increased demand for local healthy foods. So clearly we need to figure out these solutions, and that's why I think vertical farming is such an important function of community resiliency going forward. I did want to also mention that a lot of these factors are actually outside the control of the communities in which we reside. So whether it's variations and distortions in the market caused by, different countries limiting the amount of international exports of food or buying in bulk for reserves, or even geopolitical issues like logistics and transit that are causing disruptions, all of these factors are contributing. And so even though this was a trend that was in existence prior to the pandemic, we've only seen that intensify. So this is the big focus. Food systems must be resilient to withstand or recover from difficult or challenging conditions. So from a community perspective, it's about having more local control and more options for sustainable food solutions. We've seen things break. We've seen a massive increase in the demand for food banks, for shelter services and other social services. So that need to invest in local capacity is well understood at all levels of government now. So around these sustainable food systems, so what's actually happening? As I mentioned, there's a lot of investment that's happening in vertical farms, but it's actually moving towards that industrialization model. So really large scale, high yield, low margin type crops, and that will serve a certain segment of the model, but that's not going to address the problem long term. So resilient communities need a different model, and vertical farms are an adaptable solution for that. They also need enabling environments. And this is why it's so wonderful to see a lot of our municipal colleagues on the call, because things like zoning, repurposing of both public and privately owned assets, whether that's land or buildings to support food systems, putting in green standards. So as we're building these vertical farms or greenhouses, we're making sure that they're attempting to be at least net neutral or net zero or carbon negative. So all that to say, with all of these changes, some of them are outside of our control, some of them are within our control. Partnerships are critical to being able to create the solution. Public sector needs to be involved, as I said, things like planning policy, zoning, asset management, private sector for mobilizing investments, not-for-profits for really connecting community needs, and then academia for staying on top of these changing technologies and best practices. We all have a piece of the solution. So we've seen creative partnerships form even before the pandemic around mobile market trucks, pop-up markets, food forests, rooftop gardens, and urban farming. So lots of activity, but really we need to understand the sustainable business models for all of these things, including vertical farms, and developing the training, the tools, and the resources that are needed. So if you consider like early stage of this industry development, this is why the partnerships with institutions that do applied research like Seneca College is so vitally important, because we can't just bubble up these creative partnerships and then have them tail off. We really need to understand how to establish them, sustain them, and then expand them in other communities. And this is a saying, I didn't put who said it because it was me. I've been known for sharing this one for a long time. Collaboration is hard. If it was easy, everyone would do it. So we've said that there's a need for collaboration, and now we need to talk about how. And this is an area that Kingbridge has taken a leadership role and a specialization in building those partnerships of purpose. And I'm going to share with you just an example. In March of 2020, as the pandemic was starting, there was a serious need for temporary isolation shelter services for those that are homeless. And between Kingbridge, York Region Community Services, and the Salvation Army, we were able to mobilize to stand up the whole facility as a temporary isolation shelter for the homeless. That was supposed to be something that was going to be in place for maybe a month or two. And we're almost 2 years later, and a partnership that was created in less than a month has now been operating successfully for this long, and adapting to all of these changing conditions throughout the various waves and the increased demand for shelter services. And why I like to highlight this is when you think about the organizations that came together, public sector, private sector, and not-for-profit, we all have different vocabulary, we all have different business processes, we all have different governance, and we all have different cultures. And so the ability to blend those and understand each other's objectives and search for the win-win-win is absolutely critical. And that's the key to impactful partnerships that we're now bringing to innovation and food sustainability. So we are home for ventures, for projects. I've mentioned our partnership with Seneca, a partnership of purpose, and we are very connected with the community, farmers, businesses, the township, and we are building that enabling ecosystem to be able to design, fabricate, distribute, marketing and experience supporting these ventures so that they don't have to build it all themselves. And I'm going to just show you this ecosystem at work. So the types of organizations that are part of the Kingbridge Innovation Hub, Seneca, of course, Compass Food Group, which is a multinational food services company. Boreal Greens is on site. We have Milo, that's a company in the ownership portfolio, York Region, Chatham Agricultural Infrastructure Design, Forests Ontario, Ecograta, our family company, and King Township. So you can see that we've got quite a broad range of partnerships, and all of these are necessary for advancing the future of sustainable food. And so I want to end just very quickly by talking about it's a collective endeavor. If we're trying to solve food security, if we're trying to bring back the ability to grow, process, and distribute food at a more local level, and certainly within our province and across the country, we have to work together. And it's only by forming these partnerships of purpose that we can make that happen. And so I invite anyone that has some ideas or would like to be engaged with this ecosystem to connect with us. I know that Brandon's going to share a lot more specifics about the types of ways that you can apply principles of vertical farming to start your own business. And Namrata is going to be talking about the great work that Seneca is doing. But please, if you also want to understand more about partnerships, feel free to reach out.
Well, thank you, Karen. That was very, very insightful, and you really did underline that need for partnerships. You referenced a quote that you often say, and I'll reference another one that you often say, that the water rises all boats, and if we work together, it's going to be for the betterment of everyone. And from a personal side, I just wanted to thank you for the active and dogged pursuit of innovation that you have done throughout the ecosystem. At this point, I want to bring Brandon in to talk a little bit about his venture. But Brandon, before you present your slides, can you please just explain how you first became such a passionate entrepreneur in the agri-tech sector and the vertical farming area?
Absolutely, and thanks, Chris. I might need one of the moderators to help me get my video back on because it's been disabled. But there we go. You know what interested me most in terms of getting into, we'll say, sustainable agriculture and vertical farming was a passion for change, passion to find creative ways for businesses, people like myself, young people coming out of 6 years of university, hearing about the problems of our world today, the problems that we'll be encountering in the future, and wanting to find a very practical and pragmatic way to go about that. And that sort of layered on top of my endless curiosity and sort of curiosity around agriculture innovation and my passion really turned a hobby project into a business, into an amazing life journey that I can share. We'll be sharing a little bit about in the sort of next few slides. And so I wouldn't change anything for the world. And really, to me, the overall vision around food and my ethos is that, you know, every single person on this call has to eat food, no matter how old you are, no matter where you're located, no matter what your, you know, belief systems are, et cetera, your ethnicity. Food is really something that is cohesive, a really cohesive component in our society, and can be. But unfortunately, there's a serious disconnect between the people consuming the food and most of the farmers producing the food. And so part of my vision was, how do we bring the farm to the city in a creative and innovative way to reconnect people to food on the social level and really create a demonstration for what the dynamic of this integration, urban agriculture, agriculture, we'll call it 4.0 moving forward to satisfy those needs. So it's a bit of a longer explanation, but I'm excited to share you know, a little bit of my journey with you. So bear with me for a second and I will share my screen. Awesome. So my presentation today is looking at applied principles of vertical farming. And so I'll first start off and give you a little bit more of an intro or bio about me. And a few of the top points is I built my first vertical farm in my basement in 2015. Sort of a hobby project that was really a, you know, hobby and a passion around agriculture, that then led to the co-founding of an ag tech company called Ripple Farms in 2016. Where we built, and you'll see some pictures in a second, the first urban farming unit of its kind in Canada, as a way to basically set up an urban vertical farm using controlled environment agriculture premises, and combined with aquaponics, the raising of fish and fish producing nutrients to the plants, located about 2 kilometers away from the CN Tower, in a location called the Evergreen Brickworks. Through that company, we won Ontario's top social enterprise startup of the year in 2018. For the immense community impact and the training and education of over 3,000 high school students, youth and young professionals, and introducing them to urban agriculture and vertical farming and aquaponics of the sort. In collaboration with Seneca College, I was pretty instrumental in hosting Canada's first vertical farming boot camp. We hosted 3 of these events for a number of young professionals interested in getting into the space, where I could share the lessons learned, the technical aspects, building on the basis of science, technology, we'll say engineering, math being business, and how to position businesses and opportunity, businesses and technologies to get people started with their own farming systems. Part of my journey, again, I was recruited you know, to represent Canada as a youth agriculture ambassador and then a mentor in Belgium and Brazil, participating in events with over 100 youth from around the world and getting diverse perspectives around agriculture, seeing how potentially new age technology can fit into different systems. There's different needs, different budgets, different climates. And so it really helped to broaden my perspective. And along my journey this past year, I was recognized as one of Canada's top 30 under 30 sustainability trailblazers, which again was a nice recognition for the hard work and my perseverance, because the story has its ups and downs, but it's passion that's led me through. So on the right hand side, you can see a few pictures of some projects I worked on and built myself, and you know, I'll share a bit more of that in a second. So I wanted to sort of maybe paint the picture of what I'm going to go through today, which is looking at a walkthrough of some of the practical examples of vertical farms, then going into the technical needs of what a vertical farm or controlled environment ag system needs, and lastly, look into some of the sort of strategy and planning if you're looking to start your own vertical farm, or sort of looking at where to gain more information and understand how this might fit in at a variety of different levels. So the first thing we can start off with is looking at scale. There's a number of factors in determining what a vertical farm is going to be. Again, it's a broad concept, and as Karen mentioned, lots of these commercial operations in vertical farming that are feeding mainstream markets, retail markets and grocery stores now, they're very large scale. And so it doesn't mean that vertical farming is only in that capacity. It really can fit into any different component. It can be in your basement. It can be in a community center. It can be in a shipping container. It can be in another type of modular grow unit or building environment. And so some of the things when you're considering this is, how do you bring your dream into action, basically? And some of the factors are looking at location and space. Are you looking at starting a business or doing that as a hobby to feed yourself or your family? What kind of budget are you looking at, which helps reflect the type of technology you might select if you're going to build it yourself, or if you're looking at different types of infrastructure components. Would you like to do hydroponics, or would you like to get into fish and have some protein and do aquaponics as well? And just considering some of the more complexities and now having two different components that need to balance itself. And another question to really ask yourself is, what is your end goal? Again, is it for business to start up, to commercialize, to scale, to derive revenue based on a cost of goods, or is a smaller scale project, again, more of a hobby that will go to feed and supplement Canadian grocery bill that's growing ever more expensive every single year? Or is it to satisfy a community where the output and the calories produced by the farm or operation are more important as an impact metric? So all of these things sort of paint the picture as to the mindset of getting into vertical farming, why and what your end goal is. With that in mind, there's a number of different scales that these operations come in, and we'll start with tabletop gardens. It's sort of do-it-yourself to purchasable systems across a range of things, producing small amounts, but still having a bit of agriculture in the home as almost a component of health and mental health and wellness. Where you can plant and harvest some food, and it's a fun practice. As you look a little bit larger, the sort of home and classroom concept comes in a variety of scales. One of the pictures here is a sort of turnkey aquaponics system at a high school that I installed, and another one is a sort of student-led project, do-it-yourself, where there's some vertical towers tied to a media bed where there's different types of products. Again, the integration of new age agriculture into the educational system is becoming ever more important as this industry is growing and needs a pipeline of talent and passionate young individuals to look at the future of agriculture and how we're going to feed our growing population. As you sort of look at things getting a little bit larger, we can consider sort of community-based enterprises where this would be technically called the fodder system that can also produce microgreens, and a project I worked on to support job application and training to physically and mentally disabled individuals to provide them with meaningful work, where product was then being cultivated and sold to support the social enterprise from a financial means. So again, getting a little larger on that side, driven as a community-based impact. On the small business side of things, there's a variety of different, we'll say, container farms, different smaller scale projects that are applicable to perhaps remote areas, don't require the same amount of infrastructure. Again, some different components as we're looking at how vertical farming from its foundation can scale over time. Here's a couple other examples of small businesses. Again, a couple of companies, one is Freight Farms, and when they started, they're called Farm One, in two different types of technology. One's in an existing building using a multi-tiered horizontal racking system. The other one's using vertical towers in a turnkey containerized solution that doesn't require, having a building, having to insulate the building, et cetera. You really only need to hook up your power and your water. So there's a whole different, realm of ways that you can go about getting into vertical farming or defining a solution that satisfies your need or your community's needs best. In terms of a formal step of making a plan, one of the really important components where I started was a thing called a business model canvas. Now, if you're looking to do more home and hobby, you don't have to practice or focus on this as much. But if you're looking to start up a business or find out how your business is going to position itself in a community, it's extremely important to look at how the business model canvas is a critical component that defines segments, defines your general cost structure, creates what the value proposition is for your business that'll help to then create a product-based strategy to best apply and ensure your success over time, as well as the impact. One of the places in terms of collaboration here is a shout out to, as Chris had mentioned, being supported by groups like Seneca Helix and Seneca's Faculty of Continuing Education and Training. So going to the regional leaders that can help you on different components that perhaps aren't your strong suit. As I mentioned, I was a scientist coming out of school, and then built my way into understanding the premises of business, but it wasn't without the help of others, and providing you different types of strategy and tools to challenge yourself and build those skills for me as an entrepreneur. A bit about my story in terms of what I did is I turned a sketch on a piece of graph paper into a reality. And as I mentioned, this was the first urban farming unit in Canada, which was a custom designed, 20-foot shipping container, insulated shipping container with a greenhouse on the top. And so as you can kind of see in one of the pictures, there's the fish tanks that are there. And really through the proper support and collaboration, I was able to, again, bring this dream into reality in a really creative and cost-effective way for me to enter the vertical farm marketplace without having to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on a turnkey system to just get started. Had an amazing opportunity through my business to develop my own vertical grow technology, to engage with students, to have high school students, to have lower income community-based student groups come to learn about urban agriculture, to do cool project, inspire students of how agriculture is a really unique career path, and there's amazing opportunities in terms of the future of what that holds. And frankly, the perception amongst most urban city students as a farmer is somebody riding a tractor holding a pitchfork growing hay or corn. And so changing the perception of what agriculture really means and its impact was so valuable to me, and the lessons learned along the way of teaching and training people was inspiring. As we sort of move forward in my journey, we built another urban farming unit with a dynamic design to support Seneca College's cafeteria. And so being able to support a salad bar in the cafeteria with an on-farm urban farm unit that was supported by both the faculty and the students. It provided us with the grounds to host the first vertical farming boot camp in Canada. And it also gave us an amazing opportunity to research new technologies and perform applied research on lights, nutrient formulas, feed formulas for our fish, and a bunch of different other components that helped us to optimize and for me to understand the metrics around environmental technologies and sustainable technologies as vertical farming has really grown over time. A couple other cool projects, again, is the essence of turning a dream into reality is pictures, pictures, and then I got better at using SketchUp so I could then turn it into a digital drawing and then bring that to reality. And so again, it all starts for me with the fundamentals of what these components are, what your vision is and what your end goal is. Is it from an education or impact side, where I built an agriculture demonstration unit with aquaponics, a vertical farm using different components at the exhibition in Toronto, and demonstrated that to tens of thousands of people, or whether it's not the starting point for Boreal Greens, where I built a vertical farm within a warehouse and then did collaborative research to finalize my data, build a refined business model to really launch my company. It all starts with sort of what your dream is, and hopefully I can share in the next little bit some of those foundations. In terms of wanting to start your farm indoors, as I said, the foundations is looking at your plant needs. So perhaps some of those who are on the call or the webinar today have information of this, but for those who are interested again in getting into vertical farming, I think building the basis of foundational needs is so critical to making better decisions along the way, to making better investments and making more impact. So what I'll start with is when we compare our outdoor environment to our indoor environment, we're looking at beautiful sunlight, wind, sunlight controlling temperature regionally, and then soil and water, again, on the right side here for what is helping our plants to grow. But in controlled environment agriculture, we need to use different components of technology and science-based knowledge to derive the best climate conditions for a certain crop, managed with a certain production cycle to get the best results for our customers, for ourselves, whatever it may be. So this sort of paints a nice picture in terms of what that looks like broadly. There's really four major components of what plant needs to grow. As I mentioned, we have our soil and substrate starting from the ground up. Something we really take for granted, I'll say, and it's very concerning that we have such a significant amount of arable soil loss globally. It's pushing this industry. However, major consideration when we get into vertical farming. The next is water and nutrients. Air temperature and air movement are very critical in terms of reflecting what an air pattern might be, as well as maintaining climate to reduce the amount of microclimates you can create within different types of vertical farm technology. And then we've got sunlight, or as we'll call it technically, photosynthetic active radiation, or PAR, that helps to derive our best lighting technology for specific plant needs. In terms of a quick example for what the purpose of root substrates are, so this is our soil in vertical farming, and it provides us with a structure for the roots that provides stability for the plants. Inside of these materials, they're engineered appropriately to have the ability for pockets, both macro and micro pore spaces that enable moisture retention, as well as deposits of oxygen to be present that support the health of the root network that then provides resilience and better yields in your plants. The other component of this air pockets and macro and micro pores designed appropriately is what's called biological surface area. And so especially when you consider in aquaponics, a little bit more than a sterile environment, hydroponics, you're looking for surface area where good beneficial microbes can create a microbiome for the plants that builds more resilience in terms of supporting both the plant community and your aquatic community. In terms of water and what to monitor on the water side, it's very important. Again, things that we take for granted, but in vertical farms, traditionally hydroponic, water is basically everything. So the temperature of your water and heaters and chillers to help maintain that temperature, depending on your infrastructure, is very important. Having pH to bring up or down the pH of the water, your source water that might be well water or municipal water, if it's treated with chlorine, different considerations around filtration equipment. The nutrients in terms of your macro and micronutrients come in the form of either a powder-based recipe or a liquid-based recipe that get engaged or introduced into the system on a particular frequency. Understanding particulates and potentially mechanical filtration that's required as part of more of an aquaponic system, but still decayed roots and other types of sediments build up in hydroponics, and not having them incur problems to your water piping system, et cetera. Very important. And then basically getting your general reading of what your VOCs, volatile organic compounds, heavy metals, salt, bacteria, and pathogens are from your source water, and maintaining that. Extremely important, again, fundamental consideration of building and actually successfully running a vertical farm. Some of the other things to consider when it comes to lighting, sunlight we take for granted. Duration and spectrum change throughout the seasons. Artificial lighting is amazing in that we can replicate that in this controlled environment. There's really 4 core types of lights. And there's new technologies being developed, but LED is the most common in terms of vertical farm systems. There's also high intensity discharge or HID, high pressure sodium HPS, and then our sort of standard fluorescent lights, although the most energy efficient is LED lights. And as you can see on the graph here, there are different wavelengths loaded on the bottom in terms of nanometers that activate different components in the leaf tissue as a component of photosynthesis. I think this was shared, this picture, I love it, and I believe one of the gentlemen shared it last week in a webinar, but light directly impacts plants, in a multitude of ways, from duration, looking at the vegetative state. We consider our seasonality. We have longer days. As the days get shorter, it stimulates the fruiting or flowering of most plants outdoors. We have to do that in vertical farming, depending on what the crop you're cultivating is. The intensity of the light changes how much a plant will be compact or stretch, and potentially how effective it is at generating energy from the light into the plant. And the spectrum is also very important. Again, this image shows how spectrum has a direct impact on the physiomorphology of a plant, changing not only the physical nature of it, but looking at how it changes the chemical and the pigment of the plant is quite fascinating. Again, a bit more of a rabbit hole I sort of encourage you to check out on your own. In terms of environmental management and controlling your environment, some really key things are your temperature, humidity, and air composition. One of the most important things that I'll say on a fundamental level in vertical farming is healthy plants are drinking water and nutrients, and they're sweating them out. So the most important component in managing an environment, if it's in a greenhouse, is looking at active and passive measures to manage and control temperature, but also being very considerate of your humidity, which is reflective of this concept called vapor pressure deficit, which is what is the amount of moisture in the tissue of your plants, and what is the amount of moisture in your environment. If there's too much moisture in your environment, then your plants won't be able to basically sweat out this humidity. And so that creates a restriction on the plant's ability to properly grow over time. In terms of air movement in different vertical farming systems, we have a multi-tiered design versus a vertical tower design. And it's really important to consider how the air movement and flow passes through these spaces, especially when considering planting density of different types, different designs, and different infrastructure. So this is just a slide to sort of say, being conscious of where your fans and air movers are. It's not necessarily always as simple as just having a central air distribution system. You might need some more active air movement that helps to build, to eliminate microclimates, build the cellulose structure in your plants as they sort of wiggle in the wind, and really create a more optimal environment by circulating things through your dehumidifier. In terms of this sort of next step is looking at sort of strategy and planning of design and budgeting for a vertical farm. So some of the major key considerations if you're looking to establish something is your location. How close are you to market? Consider that, in terms of price of land, again, reflecting the scale. Next component is zoning. Understand what your zoning is, communicating with local municipal townships and planning authorities to find out what implications might be, a bit more driven by the scale of that operation in terms of its impact. it's in a basement, I don't think you have to worry about zoning immediately, but we'll let them talk about that next week. Next is infrastructure and utilities. What's existing? What needs to be brought in? Is it a new building? Do you need water, natural gas, hydro, all those kind of components, or even a well, versus a more existing infrastructure type of building? Understanding obviously building code as you're looking to build something out. Different equipment sourced from different parts of the world may not align with Ontario building code, and making sure that it also aligns with your workplace health and safety practices and measures. The other components are looking at your food safety and traceability, which is part of your operational structure, and then your production efficiency and how it layers into aligning with regulatory needs, as well as maximizing your day-to-day efficiency. In terms of the major capital expenses on startup, you've got your property and building, infrastructure upgrades and permitting, which is a pre-planning process. That will help to, with your budgeting, define what your cultivation equipment might be. Your HVAC and airflow are going to be another major component of startup capital. Your grow lighting is one of the largest components of startup capital, and depending on design and intensity. And then the other components in the operational structure is your processing equipment and food safety equipment that round up the initial really considerations you need to start any type of vertical farm. The most important considerations I'd say if somebody is thinking about starting a vertical farm is this journey from farm to fork. What is your target market? What are your anticipated volumes of output? What are your frequency of distribution? Is it daily, weekly, monthly? Again, relative to scale. What are the storage requirements of the food that you're harvesting? Is it harvested in the morning, shipped the same day? How is it satisfying the needs of a cold chain to different types of suppliers? And how does it all reflect to the quality assurance? There's a lot of different pieces when you go farm to fork, if it's direct from the farm to somebody's house through like a CSA, but if it's into a warehouse, if it's into a restaurant, there's different structures and considerations as part of that. And so I really urge people to think about how that might play out in the overall structure again of getting it and having a successful business. On the regulatory side of things, I can just touch on some of the really important components I've learned is, are you doing plants or protein or both? And how does that affect the different regulatory standards around plant cultivation in an indoor scenario, sort of like a greenhouse, or protein, we'll say on the aquaculture side? Are we looking at local sales, interprovincial sales, or exported sales? There's different regulatory authorities from, we'll say like the City of Toronto to OMAFRA to the CFIA that look at different components of how this operation is running, who you're selling to, because at the end of the day, there needs to be a plan in place if something happens to your food to communicate with the people who bought your food and to trace it back to find out what that problem was. The other components are packaged or living, cut and or washed. Is it organic or not? As I mentioned, the logistics and the cold chain management are extremely important in bringing any type of food to a customer to prevent the presence of bacteria as food is getting warmer. You can't be bringing a 30°C head of lettuce, putting it in a small crate, driving for half an hour, bringing it to a restaurant. The likelihood of something being unsafe in that process is extremely high, and you have to be considerate of maintaining cooler temperatures to limit bioactivity post-harvest. The other components, as I mentioned, is traceability and recalls, and then making sure you've got the right protocols and proper cleanable surfaces in your infrastructure. So a lot of different sort of moving components outside of just wanting to have a vertical farm that really has to align to make your business and yourself successful. Some advice that I'll provide on the strategy side is looking at how the sales strategy needs to align with your product strategy. Where are you going to be selling your food? Is it a farmer's market? Is it direct to consumer? Is it grocery retailers locally? Is it national grocery retailers, aggregators, wholesalers like through the Toronto Food Terminal? Are we trying to go direct through restaurants or food service groups who also have a more wholesale distribution model? You need to understand this and think about where your product is going so that you can go back and design the right building environment, the right system, the right plan and protocols to make sure you satisfy all of those. So it's almost like looking 2 years or a year ahead and saying, who are the people that I want to impact and sell my food to the most, that I believe provides most value to my company or myself, my operation, and then how does this all come back through the regulatory process to then help me define and design the best grow system for what I'm needing to grow. Because tomatoes need a totally different infrastructure than lettuce or microgreens. Some of the components, as I mentioned, in terms of design components that I sort of touched on last week, is looking at these fundamental principles. So there's raft and deep water culture, very commonly used in aquaponics because there's larger piping, the sediment doesn't build up, but now being integrated more into vertical farming. We have nutrient film technique, where a slow film of nutrient is flowing through channels or a basin to provide nutrients and oxygen throughout the root zone. We have ebb and flow or flood and drain techniques that are very, very commonly used in Ontario greenhouses around the world that basically involve the periodic fertilization and fertigation, or irrigation and fertilization of plants, again, sort of on and off, where water moves from a reservoir into a growing tray. Then there's drip fertigation that's a bit more common, we'll say, in traditional greenhouses from the standpoint of tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, eggplant cultivation, where water is point source dripped through emitters into the root zone of plants that are packed in. Applied to the vertical farming component of things, we'll say, is looking at how this is being used in strawberry-based cultivation with a group that's in Quebec called Femme de Boire. And again, fundamentally, the technique is drip fertigation. The crop application varies within a particular range. Here are some examples of different cultivation equipment where we can see different types of grow towers and racking systems. Again, the containerized model, we'll say a basement-based small-scale vertical farm operation, novel culinary herbs. Then looking at more commercialized models that you're seeing across the global spectrum of the vertical farming industry, where there are systems that have elevators, automated components, different types of lighting, different types of systems, key advantages promoted, process-based efficiency. And so again, what I'd say, it comes back to the interest of what you're looking to grow, for whom, what are some of the key components you think from your budgeting perspective are there, and then how do you go about building the right and scaling the appropriate design business offering. Because these farms can range anywhere from being, we'll call it like $200 to something very small you could do in your house as more of a hobby, to anything up to 10, 15, 20, $100 million projects that are going on right now with these touchless, really factory farm designs. So lots of different considerations, but they all come down to the fundamentals of what you're looking to grow, how you're growing, and what your budget is, and obviously what the plant's needs are. In terms of environmental management, it's another really big component to successful vertical farming, is looking at what are the different measuring devices, like handheld devices? Are we using data collection devices to drive business data collection and results to infer yields to maximize our environment? There's different tiers and different price points for different tech. Then we can layer in the automation equipment component. So does the sensor tell us how cold or warm it is and then record it? Or does the sensor tell us how cold and warm it is, turn on the heater, turn on the broiler, and find a way to then derive more automation in this process? So there's a lot of different components. And again, I urge people to sort of look and see what's in the marketplace, come at a variety of prices, but really you have to know what your climate is, because that's how you're going to manage and monitor your plant growth, optimize your yields, and make any changes that you need immediately after having a set of data. And data is extremely important. This sort of speaks to, again, a range of processing-based equipment as part of a vertical farming ecosystem. Is, do we have an operation where we are able to hand seed because we're harvesting 500 plants a week? Are we harvesting 100,000 plants a week where we need more sophisticated technology, not necessarily a wand seeder like shown in the picture here, but totally automated solutions? There's different critical components, as mentioned, from like the seeding through the harvesting through the transplanting that I try to embody in. Are we using scissors to try to cut our greens and then put them into a package? Or are we using sort of mid-grade market farmer products like a quick cut greens cutter to start processing at a price point of about $800? Or we're working with another company that does a fully automated solution because we need to do 1,000 flats an hour. So everything comes with scale, comes with price points, but based off the fundamental operating principles in addition to the fundamental environmental principles. So sort of wrapping up here is providing everybody with my six tips to success and sort of getting something going, is looking at to define your market and product strategy is extremely important getting started. You need to gather information from local partners and authorities to understand if it's possible and what the other implications are to your timeline of getting a project started up. It might seem simple to grab, go out and buy a shipping container, plop it down somewhere, but it's actually much more sophisticated now that authorities are much more aware of vertical farming in general. The third component is establishing a basic budget for your project. Understand what your needs are. If you're just starting up, if you want to demonstrate something, what is your bandwidth? Or if you're looking to raise money from investors, how can you find and develop a strategy to move down that avenue? The fourth thing is communicating with experts to realize your costs and assumptions. If anybody's new, I would highly recommend, communicating with people who are experienced in the space. Doesn't necessarily have to be someone like myself, but there's definitely other participants on this call who have experience, who have a process with realized costs that help to really define your assumptions. The next two components here are developing your business plan and financial model. To do anything in business, you need to have a plan. You need to have both a plan and a vision, a product plan, a regulatory plan, and a financial plan that all align to the realities, because frankly, growing food and vertical farming, especially if it's leafy greens, is a very low margin crop. And so defining that plan, if your business is based off of impact or if your business is based off of margin, it helps to drive different decisions earlier to really define the scope of your project. And then the last thing I'll say is communicating with sales partners to understand price considerations. Now, this is not necessarily sales partners in the sense of technology partners. This is who you're selling product to. What are the prices they're going to pay? Do they want it packaged? Do you need to label it? Are you selling to restaurants? Do they want it in bags? What are the counts and volumes that the industry you're trying to target wants, which varies drastically from pricing and presentation at a farmer's market to pricing and presentation in a grocery store. So very important, again, defining all of these things, thinking about them, and bringing it back to really what the plan is. And finally, really appreciate everybody's time today. I talked fairly quickly, but I knew I had quite a bit to cover in half an hour. So appreciate your time. Happy to connect, whether it's on one of the social channels or through my email, bd@borealgreensco.ca. I'm excited to answer some of your questions after NEMRAP.
Thanks, Brandon. Your website is in the chat, which is fantastic. You may speak quickly as you highlighted, but you provided a whole lot of incredible content, and you have actually lit up the questions in the chat, which we will get to after our next facilitator. But I have to say I was struck by a couple of things, Brandon, when I asked about the passion of why you got into this. You mentioned, and I wrote it down, reconnecting food on a social level. I think that's a very, very powerful statement. And then you went on to highlight the importance of engaging high school students, the future, into this early. And I think beyond all the incredible information that you provided, those two things I think are cornerstones of you, and a bit of a guiding light that I have seen from you all the way through your journey. So thank you for that. At this point, I want to bring in Namrata. Now, Namrata, Karen and Brandon have both highlighted the great partnerships that they've had with Seneca and the importance of partnerships overall. Can you please enlighten us on the role of applied research at Seneca and the importance of partnerships to Seneca?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, those were both excellent talks from Brandon and Karen, and they touched upon key points specifically around partnerships and in the field of vertical farming, all the various needs and challenges that still exist, and some of the unknowns that are out there in terms of research questions, and that will help move this sector forward. I think Karen mentioned that, you know, with an emerging field like this, it's important to have all the stakeholders at the table, which include investors and government organizations, municipal organizations, and academic institutes like Seneca also have a role to play in moving this forward. Our main focus is to try to train and provide skills to the next generation of the workforce, and working with industry and experiential learning experiences and working on research projects is one of the ways that we can help, you know, build that workforce and provide those that skills and expertise and basically build talent for the future. And so that's why partnerships like this is important to Seneca. I think it's also very important to entrepreneurs like Brandon and other companies that we've worked with or are working with. What I'd like to do today, and I'm going to share my screen, is basically just provide a high-level overview of applied research at Seneca, and then walk through a few projects that we have been involved in or are in the process of building. Okay. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I just wanted to really quickly provide a high-level overview of what Seneca Applied Research is. Our goal is to provide innovative solutions to specific real-world challenges posed by an industry or community partner. So the key piece here is it's very solutions-oriented. We want to provide actionable, commercially relevant deliverables at the end of the project, and we do this by helping refine or enhance existing products, processes, or services. And the other piece is that this is still research. So we are still using scientific methods and an iterative approach to solve challenges. It's not intended to be contract research or routine tasks. And the last piece is around opportunities for student research assistants to work on collaborative research projects. As I mentioned earlier, we want to be able to provide that experiential learning experience to students, and working with faculty members who are subject matter experts in this area and the industry partners. It creates it fosters a collaborative environment that can then lead to great outcomes. In the last year, applied research at Seneca, we conducted 53 applied research projects, which involved 49 faculty investigators across all areas of research, from engineering to life sciences to business. We had 100 student research assistants participate in research, and which brought in around $2 million of research funding to Seneca. I think Brandon covered quite a lot of this, but just as I mentioned, for applied research to happen, we basically work on needs that the sector have, or the challenges that the sector is facing, and key challenges currently facing the vertical farming industry is maximizing crop yield and quality, automation, automating some of their processes, business models and financing models, as well as expansion beyond leafy greens and herbs. So with that in mind, we have basically at Seneca have been able to address many of those challenges due to the expertise that we have at Seneca, and have put them in three main buckets. The first one being agricultural techniques and food production. The second is technology. And the third one is around business research. So I'm just going to go over a few projects in each of these buckets. The first one being agricultural techniques and food production. So we're working with an indoor vertical farming company that builds, sells, and supports indoor growing gardens and farming modules. The company is interested in investigating ways to assist their customers to increase yield, water efficiency, and nutrient contents of their grown crops, which is an important factor and a challenge for vertical farming companies. The Seneca research team of principal investigators and research assistants from the School of Biological Sciences and Applied Chemistry are working to develop methods for crop nutrient analysis, performing chemical analysis, and then conducting data collection in order to make recommendations on optimizing food growth and nutrition. The ultimate goal for this project is to develop recipes that can be then used by consumers to get the optimal crop growth and yield and reproducibility in their growing techniques. And then they can avoid some of the common growing mistakes that can affect output. In terms of technology, this basically covers this broad area of using technological innovations to develop precision agriculture methods in vertical farming. So these include the application of AI techniques such as computer vision, machine learning, and automation, as well as other technologies such as robotics, sensors, soil sampling, and precision machinery in order to grow crops more efficiently and to improve reproducibility. So in this area, Seneca has over the years developed a strong expertise in AI-related techniques through our School of Software Development and Data Sciences. Also through our School of Electronic and Mechanical Engineering Technologies, we offer expertise in advanced manufacturing and building sciences with a very heavy focus on sustainability and efficiency. And then lastly, through our Center for Open Source Technologies for Emerging Platforms, we have the expertise in super embedded systems, especially to solve challenges at the intersection of software and hardware. And then the last bucket is around business research. In this area, Seneca has recently embarked on a 3-year major applied research project with our local partners, Greenest City and Toronto Urban Growers, which aims at helping urban farmers tackle one of their biggest problems, that is how to develop a strong and sustainable business. So this is more around urban farming in general, but obviously it also affects vertical farmers. Working with researchers from Seneca's School of Accounting and Financial Services, the project aims to develop the first urban farmer-focused business practices through a combination of current practices, urban considerations, agricultural knowledge, and business model analysis. Once the plan is created, the researchers will then pilot the implementation of this through a series of research-guided training programs to assist interested urban farmers to create their own urban agricultural enterprises. This urban agriculture enterprise support program will incorporate training, long-term mentorship, and microfinancing with terms designed to be accessible to a wide range of potential urban farmers, including vertical farming groups. And the second project, which we're developing in collaboration with Boreal Greens and Brandon, is around operational optimization, which involves technology scouting and analysis to identify frequent and laborsome tasks in vertical farming and highlight various equipment that is being used as best practices in the industry. And also to investigate a range of global crops with specific biological parameters to identify potential cultivars that can be grown in a vertical farming system. Both of these projects utilize our expertise from Seneca Business as well as School of Accounting and Financial Services. So those are projects that we are currently working on, but in general, most of our applied research projects benefit industry partners because it enhances their productivity and competitiveness. It helps them solve business and technical challenges. Also importantly, it provides them access to infrastructure, equipment, and funding opportunities that they may not be able to get by themselves. And lastly, it fills the skills and expertise gap and also helps them identify key talent for the future. We, as an academic institute, have access to a number of funding sources that are not available directly to industry partners. And so, if you work with a college and develop your research question and a research project, then we can help apply for some of these funding grants, which can then subsidize some of the costs towards doing the research with us and getting the outcomes and the deliverables. So with that, I'd like to end. And if you are interested or anybody in the audience is interested in learning more about how to engage with us on applied research projects in urban farming or in vertical farming, please feel free to contact me. Is my contact information. Thank you.
Marada, thank you very, very much. Once again, lots of great information that you provided. Struck by a couple of things: the ability to work with industry to identify their needs and their challenges, and bring in students who will gain experiential learning experiences, but with amazing faculty who are experts in the field that can work with the industry to solve those challenges and needs. I understand that all the IP remains with the company. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And amazing that with your partnerships and networks, that you can also work with industry and access additional funds to help that industry. Like that's a win-win-win all the way around. Fantastic. So, and I see that the questions have really lit up in the chat, and we'll get to them very, very shortly. But before moving to our Q&A portion, we'd like to do a very quick Zoom polling. So Larry, would you mind bringing that up on the poll? So if everyone can just take a moment to answer the two questions, we would appreciate it. Or I guess there's 5 questions. And while we're waiting for the polls to come in, if you do have any questions, please put them in the chat. We are building out the questions right now that we will ask, and we have about a little over 17 minutes to get through as many questions as we can. Just another minute or so to finish up the questions.
Chris,
poll?
just a quick question.
Yeah.
So Helix works with entrepreneurs and ventures like Brandon and helps them with their business model and go-to-market strategy.
Yes.
What is the timing of the next intake for the next cohort of Helix?
Oh, thank you. So the next intake from Helix will start up in March. You can visit our website. We are actually putting the dates next week, early next week, and everything is free. We provide 6 foundational workshops around business model canvas that Brandon highlighted in his presentation, as well as validation and other essential elements. Once you complete those, we bring everyone into the incubator where they will match up with mentors, be able to access our internal funding. We'll support them on external funding applications, networking, events, additional workshops, everything that you would find in an accelerator to drive from ideation straight through to launch and scaling. And then we will continue to connect participants into the broader ecosystem like Kingbridge. If they need research, we'll connect them into Nimrata so that they can do that research where appropriate. And yeah, and since our launch, we have supported 600 and over 630 new ventures. I feel as though I have 630 kids. It's amazing, and we don't take any percentage of the companies at all. So, Larry, are we good with the poll, or do we need a little bit more time?
Thanks, Chris. We're good.
Awesome. So I'm going to move to the final segment of this panel, which is some of the questions that have come up throughout the presentation. So as I pull it up, I'm going to start with you, Brandon. What is the biggest challenge you have seen in vertical farming ecosystems since you began in 2015 until now in 2020? What's the biggest change?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There has been there's been a massive amount of investment into vertical farming. And frankly, in 2015, Canada was more focused on investment into cannabis and that type of controlled environment agriculture that took away the real opportunity for investment into controlled environment agriculture for food production. Now, through that general premise into those technologies, there was a lot learned from how to manage different operations, because a higher margin product, lots of investment flow, made a lot of room, we'll say, for companies to make mistakes. On the global scale, not only has investment changed, technology has begun to be refined and expanded at the same time. In that, really when I started, it was like a zip row was the tower, the vertical tower design. There wasn't a lot of vertical farm in terms of aeroponics and different types of ponic designs for the fertilization. It really worked off of transition, we'll say, greenhouse technology and finding a way to make it work indoors. And a lot of problems started to happen with regards to the light, different types of light giving off heat, different types of light. I think somebody mentioned potentially burning plants, wrong recipes, wrong timing. And what's happened over this period is there's been so much data and applied research performed on how a plant, and a specific plant, can be optimized in a particular environment. That has really helped to drive different decisions and opportunity. But like on the whole scale, what's come to these major operations, and the biggest change is full turnkey integration from climate to fertigation to robotic seeding, plant movement, harvesting, packaging, the whole spectrum. And that's happened with a couple companies on a much broader scale. The only other really interesting change is now we have like small scale vertical farms in grocery stores. And so we look at how the vertical farm, instead of being a standalone and a novelty, fits into the agriculture system in an applied way. It's quite exciting to see.
Awesome. Namrata, so how do other ag tech or vertical farming companies like Boreal Greens go about working with Seneca's applied research area?
Yes, thanks, Chris, for that. So I provided my contact information. The best way to begin is to have a conversation with us. Reach out to me, email, or with through LinkedIn. Some form of correspondence, and we usually like to have an initial conversation with the company or the potential partner, to understand what they're looking for. We have them fill out an expression of interest, but it's just basically to try to find the right faculty member within Seneca who can help, help solve their challenges or help work with them on a project. Once we have that initial conversation and we think that this is something that Seneca might be able to help them with, then we will connect them with the faculty member and work with them to develop a project plan or scope out the project in such a way that it can fit within the needs of a government grant, because ultimately that's where we would be getting funding to do the project. And so we need to work together to develop the project, scope it out, identify the length, the budget, all of those things. And then, we will have somebody from my team work with them to submit the grant to get the funding to run the project. So the first step is to reach out to me, and we can go from there.
Awesome, thank you. Brandon, back to you. Can you talk a little bit about how you look at your sales strategy and where you ultimately choose to sell into?
Yes, within reason, and be conscious that everybody that own and run a business. Saw some of the questions, and there's certain things I would love to share, but I have to have the best interest of my business and my investors as well.
We understand.
But having said that, on the spectrum of defining a sales strategy, and understanding, if you would like to sell at a farmer's market in general, you will sell for a higher price. Perhaps if you're doing herbs, instead of what is at the grocery store for $2.99 quite frequently for a clamshell, you might garner $3.50, perhaps even $4, depending on the season, depending on the market. But you have to be aware that you need to bring those herbs to the farmer's market, pay for your market fee, stand at a booth, and communicate with people directly to make one-to-one sales. So that's a strategy that garners a higher price, takes more time, right? Works in a specific model and a particular scale. in agriculture in general, if you have a commercial vertical farm, you don't have time to really go to the farmer's market. Perhaps you have resources to send one person to a particular market for brand awareness, etc. But you want to be selling your product in volume, which means that you garner a slightly less price, but you need to define what type of, what does your end user want? Some groups will take bunches of herbs wrapped in elastic bands to the food terminal in cardboard boxes, whereas other groups will say, no, we still need washed and packaged, clamshell things in boxes because we go through to retail. So, a restaurant doesn't necessarily need individually packaged goods because they'll just throw the packaging out. But a wholesaler selling to retail will need that. So in terms of defining it, there's a lot of considerations, and it goes into the market research, finding groups and supports like research assistance through Seneca College, as well as just getting out there to understand the avenues, I think is super important. So not necessarily a one size fits all model, different scales, different people, different roles. But there's a lot of farmers that are very happy and make a living selling at farmers markets and have strategies that work, right? So it sort of depends. In a grocery store, you're fighting, against other customers and producers. Farmers market is a bit more direct, organic communication. You can tell your story, but when it comes to volume, agriculture is economies of scale.
A great answer, and I appreciate that. You've got to tread lightly around that, but I would strongly suggest to the writer of the question that you may want to connect into an innovation center or an innovation hub that would be able to help work out your unique value proposition and your particular niche market that you're going to go after. And mentioning Innovation Hub or Center, Karen, the Kingbridge Center Innovation Hub is truly so important as an innovative approach to more vertical farming knowledge into future areas of food growth. And I know that Kingbridge is working extremely closely with York Region and others, but what is the future for Kingbridge when you think vertical farming?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. We're interested in vertical farming in all of the potential applications, not only from enabling technologies, whether that's AI and data analytics, but also in making vertical farming more adaptable and accessible. And so that's why, looking at a community and the environment, the assets that it has, whether a vertical farm is indoor or outdoor, and even looking at food forests. So the whole concept of permaculture is something that we really want to explore, because ultimately, if we want to address food security, we have to empower local communities to both grow the food that they want at the types of scale that they need to support that. So I think it's a really exciting time, and when we can engage as we have with land developers and municipal planners and really amazing entrepreneurs like Brandon, things start to come together and magic happens. So we are at a transformation point, both in how our food systems operate, but also in this nascent industry of vertical farming. So I think it's going to be very exciting, and working with the applied research. We actually roll up our sleeves and do things. Not all of them will actually turn out correct the way we want, but the point is we're doing something, and we're learning as we do, and then that gets incorporated into those learnings that our partners have. I think having a ready market is also really exciting. So if we can help ventures by providing those first customers, that takes a little bit of the heat off as they're developing their new products.
Karen, one of the words that I would use to describe you is doer. You get things done, which is awesome.
Thank you.
Brandon, back to you. Is it cost effective to have a personal vertical farm for family only? And are there any concerns for mold growth in the building where the vertical farming is housed?
Great question. So I will say it's never a straight answer, and I'm sorry, because it always depends on another sort of complexity in terms of what are your objectives with the vertical farm, in terms of satisfying your needs for your family. How big is your family? How much do you think you're going to be totally dependent on it, et cetera? But with food prices rising every year, there's a CBC report, like $400 a year, more and more and more. And now we're getting into not only supply chain issues, we're getting into carbon taxation, we're getting into climate change. These are becoming direct impacts on our food supply chain that is so globalized. There is definitely a model that a vertical farm at a household scale achieves, I want to say, profitability. If you're considering that you're buying a head of lettuce from a grocery store at $3.25 or whatever it might be, you start to multiply that and you're actually able to achieve effective cost savings. I mean, perhaps call it profitability. The challenge is that depending on the system you want, you could produce 50 heads of lettuce a week, but your family might not be eating that. Perhaps there's more of a community dynamic where one household's growing the lettuce, the other one has a different type of system to grow radishes or something else that's a shorter turning sort of root crop to sort of complete like a salad, or one person's growing herbs. So there's a bit of a different dynamic, but we're trending in that direction with the price of food.
Thank you. I think we have time for maybe one, maybe two more questions. So Namrata, I hear in the chat they love the overview, and people are asking, do you work with other academic institutions across Canada and internationally? And if you can highlight any of those sort of partnerships.
Yeah, sure. We do. The short answer is we do. We actually did just put together an application with other colleges, 3 other colleges in Canada to apply for a funding, NSERC funding. So it is possible. There is not too many funding opportunities out there which allow for colleges to work together. Maybe that's going to change with the new programs that NSERC is coming out with. So we're always open to talking to other colleges and universities, as well as to develop research projects in collaboration with them. And so, I encourage people to reach out to me, and if I'm not the right person within Seneca, then I can always put them in touch with somebody else.
Awesome. And the last question, and I'm only going to give you a minute and a half, Brandon, so keep that in mind. So the question is that the asker is saying that they understand that Agriculture Canada does not recognize aquaponics as an industry and won't allow it for produce being sold commercially. Is that correct? And if so, is anything being done to change that?
So great question. I experienced that while having aquaponic farms. At the end of the day, it comes down to labeling your product. Aquaponics isn't recognized like an organic type of a product. It's not recognized in that sense. However, a head of lettuce is a head of lettuce, frankly, however you grow it, so long as it's grown within the regulatory confines and traceable and packaged appropriately for the market. The end product, you can grow it using whatever, so long as it falls within regulatory guidelines, is it consistent and safe for the consumer. Somebody just mentioned aquaponics can be organic in Canada. There's again a lot of discussion up to what is happening in terms of the dynamics of what's considered organic. There is actually the organic standard, just sort of jumping on that, is based off of the relationship between the plant canopy and the amount of soil in that plant canopy, and the basically microbiological activity that is working to contribute to enhancement of the soil as a fundamental basis. So to summarize, aquaponics is waiting to be recognized, we'll say, as a formal industry. There's a lot of different scales of projects, but there are people who grow aquaponic produce and sell it at the grocery store as heads of lettuce grown locally.
Well, and I imagine that this is such a dynamic area. Things are changing pretty quickly as we move forward. I want to thank the panel for some incredibly insightful data and information, as well as taking the time to respond to all the questions that came from the audience. Sorry, I couldn't get to all of them. We are running up against the time wall. But thank you all for being here, and I'm going to pass it off to Mina now.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris, and to all our webinar panelists for really leading us through this very engaging discussion. Great example of the power of partnership and really sharing your journey, Brendan, through your organization. We want to also thank the entire core team at York Region, Omafra and Durham Region for making this happen. I know a lot of work goes behind the scenes, so thank you. So this brings us to the conclusion of our webinar. I'd like to remind you that webinar number 3 will take place next Thursday, February the 17th, at same time, 11:30. So mark your calendars. Just a quick reminder, you don't need to re-register. So if you're registered for the entire series, you'll get a notification. It's the exact same link that you can access the webinar. I want to also share that Module 3 will focus on a high overview of the navigating permits and approvals process. I know we've heard a lot about that sort of process, and we're happy to share that 2 different companies will also come and share their experience in sort of navigating that approvals process. So once again, thank you to all our panelists. Thank you, Chris, for a great dialogue. And thank you, everyone, for taking the time out of your busy schedules to spend this hour and a half with us. So take care, stay safe, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye now.